Thank you all, and now we'll begin with our program, and Hasia Diner will talk to us and put in perspective what happened at that time.
Okay, well, first I want to thank Kate Kelly for, how's that? How am I doing? Okay. I want to thank Kate Kelly and Women's eNews for not only inviting me, but more importantly for sponsoring this a tremendous event. Several speakers have already alluded to the fact that today is International Women's Day, and we are here in the middle of Women's History Month. And for a historian, it's particularly gratifying to see so many people who have come out, taken a brief moment in their day to think about history. So it's very, very impressive, and we always say that history matters, so obviously it does. Now, it's hard to know if there would have been such a huge crowd for a 100th anniversary observance of the Triangle Fire had we not been living in an age in which labor and labor unions are not being demonized. Okay, but the fact is we do live in such a moment, and so many Americans do not realize what the organized labor brought to them. There was once an ad that said, organized labor, it brought you the weekend. So I use that as a way to begin this to say that the story of Triangle is first and foremost a story about labor and work. Triangle was not a sweatshop. Okay, Triangle was a modern factory. It was not in like the old sweatshops in people's homes, but it was the most up-to-date factory in the garment industry in New York. It was one of the largest garment factories, but it also had another distinction. Go back 2 years before the fire, and in 1909, 20,000, and then it became 60,000 shirtwaist workers went out on strike. The story of the origins of that strike are also very stirring. A meeting at Cooper Union where the male labor leaders were dithering, should we go out on strike or not? Maybe it's not a good time. A young woman, probably about 16 years old and probably under, well under 5 feet short, got up, named Clara Lemlich, and she basically said in intense, emotional Yiddish, I don't care what the men say, I say we go out on strike. And she led, it sparked this uprising of the 20,000. The strike got tremendous coverage in the New York press, and as a result of that coverage, much of which was very unflattering to the owners of the factories, a number of distinguished individuals from within the Jewish community, probably the name everybody here will be familiar with is Louis Brandeis, who would eventually become Supreme Court Justice, forced the garment factory owners to enter into what was called the Protocols of Peace, saying you have to sit down with labor and you have to negotiate with them. Most of the garment factory owners agreed, but the holdouts were none other than the owners of Triangle. Okay, so they would not sit down with the workers. They would not enter into this protocols of peace. Now, very quickly, what happened on Saturday, March 25th, 1911? Well, 500 workers who were in the factory, the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the Ash Building on the corner of Washington Place, Mercer and Green and Washington Place, found themselves caught up in a fire, the causes of which we really do not know. Maybe it was somebody threw a match into a bin of scraps, because obviously the factory was full of fabric scraps. It was probably a cutter, who had to have been a man, because only men were cutters, who was surreptitiously smoking. But whatever the cause of the fire, very quickly, flames consumed the building. The workers on the very top floor were able to escape to the roof, but it was the workers in the two other floors, the 7th and 8th floor, who were trapped. It took about 3 minutes for fire to engulf the building, and the young women tried to rush out down the doors, but they were locked from the outside. And many of the women, hearing that, actually fell to their deaths. They jumped to their deaths from the windows. Now, I want to share with you an eyewitness account, and it was offered by a young law student, a socialist named Louis Waldman. And this is, I'm sorry, he had been a law student. He was then a state assemblyman. And so here's his description of the fire. On Saturday afternoon in March of that year, March 25th to be precise, I was sitting at one of the reading tables in the old Astor Library, which is now the Public Theater. It was a raw and unpleasant day, and the comfortable reading room seemed a delightful place to spend the remaining few hours until the library closed. I was deeply engrossed in my book when I became aware of fire engines racing past the building. By that time, I was sufficiently Americanized to be fascinated by the sound of fire engines. And along with several others in the library, I ran out to see what was happening and followed the crowds of people to the scene of the fire. A few blocks away, the Ash Building at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street was ablaze. When we arrived at the scene, the police had thrown up a cordon around the area, and the firemen were helplessly fighting the blaze. As we know, the ladders did not go high enough to reach the 7th and 8th floors. The 8th, 9th, and 10th floors, of the building were now an enormous roaring cornice of flames. Word spread through the east side by some magic of terror that the plant of the Triangle Waste Company was on fire, and several hundred workers were trapped. Horrified and helpless, the crowd, I among them, looked up at the burning building, saw girl after girl appear at the reddened windows, paused for a terrified moment, and then leaped to the pavement below to land as mangled body pulp. This went on for what seemed like a ghastly eternity. Occasionally, a girl who hesitated too long was licked by the pursuing flames, and screaming with clothing and hair ablaze, plunged like a living torch to the street. Life nets held by the firemen were torn by the impact of the falling bodies. So this got, I think, better than any historian could write it were those eyewitness words of Louis Waldman. And so I want to end, because I know I have very limited time, and I actually teach, when I do my American Jewish history class and my women's history class, 2 full lectures on the Triangle fires. This is quite telegraphed. And I want to end with another quote. Because I think very much our program is dedicated to the labor movement, its history, and its present. And these are the words of Rose Schneiderman, one of the leaders of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, socialist and activist, who gave probably one of the most stirring orations at the Metropolitan Opera House at a memorial meeting held a few days later, April 2nd, 1911. Now, Rose Schneiderman had, by the way, been one of the leaders in the uprising of the 20,000. I would be a traitor to these poor burned bodies if I came here to talk about good fellowship. We have tried you, good people of the public, and we have found you wanting. The old Inquisition had its rack and its thumbscrews and its instruments of torture with iron teeth. We know what these things are today. The iron teeth are our necessities. The thumbscrews are the high-powered and swift machinery, close to which we must work. And the rack is here in the fire trap structures that will destroy us the minute they catch on fire. This is not the first time that girls have been burned alive in this city. Each week I must learn of the untimely deaths of one of my sister workers. Every year thousands of us are maimed. The life of men and women is so cheap and property is so sacred. There are so many of us for one job, it matters little if 146 of us are burned to death. So the legacy of the fire, its connection to the enactment of New York State safety legislations, the connection between the fire and what will become the vision of the New Deal, are other chapters in this history. But I just want to end with the following rhetorical question. Okay, what would Lizzie Adler and Anna Altman, Nina Ardito and Bertha Wendroff, Joseph Wilson and Sonia Wysotsky think if they could know that 100 years after their deaths in that fire, so many people would be gathering here, around the city, and indeed around the country, invoking their memory, not only for the sake of engaging with history, but also to try to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely perfect and sets the stage so well.